For those watching, this is a first long-form informal interview with Spencer Luckey. And I was doing a little, some notes in advance, thinking of the things that we would talk about. And I realized very quickly that there is a broad spectrum of things for us to talk about with Luckey Climbers and lots of other things. So Spencer, why don't you just introduce yourself a little bit for someone who doesn't know you from Adam.
My name is Spencer Luckey. I was born and raised here in New Haven, and I went to the Yale School of Architecture, and now I run what amounts to a family business, making playground equipment all over the world, and we embrace digital fabrication techniques and digital design techniques, and have sort of, well, for lack of a better, we've sort of been pioneers in the sort of expressionistic playground equipment world, and we've done projects in 15 countries and a lot of very prestigious institutions around the world, and it's been a great thing. We've had a good run until recently with the COVID era, but I think we're going to be kind of pivoting towards Asia, and we'll see how that goes. Anyway, I'm delighted to talk to you today, JR, because it's always sort of fun. Anyway.
Yeah, so, no, I enjoy chatting. And so it might be worth, just so that folks that are watching have a sense, I'm going to do a screen share and we'll take a look at some of your climbers. And good. I'll just go to your Pinterest, I guess. And you could tell me if any worth zooming in on.
Okay.
So you should be seeing my screen.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so we have a bunch of photos here. And so, when I look at these climbers, I think the common thing is it's like leaves, I guess, or petals, typically arranged in interesting ways with like a netting around it. And then there's some kind of skeleton structure. Or do you want to describe how you see them, being the expert?
Well, I can't claim to have any expertise. I just I see them as sort of architecture very reduced. And as an architect, I became kind of upset when I was in school, obsessed with this idea that we were always making or designing prototypes. So you would one would get an assignment for a project like, a single family home, or an artist's studio. They have all these funny projects in architecture school. And so this obsession with prototyping, and the idea that there is a kind of like ultimate best solution is one of the things that always drives me. And I'm always trying to sort of ask myself, even though I'm only designing one thing, how can I take these lessons that I'm learning from this specific design problem and apply them elsewhere? And how would I have treated previous situations differently, knowing what I know now? So it's a constant iterative process. And but there again, the thing itself, or the things themselves, are very reductive in the sense that they really are just kind of like, going back to like Logier's primitive hut. Are you familiar with Logier, the architectural theorist? He had
not in the slightest. Feel free to illuminate.
Well, there was this notion that there was like the simplest building ever, like the original primitive hut, and it had 4 columns that were made out of bundles of sticks, and then this gabled roof and this sort of hatched thing going on. And the idea was that you could make this very much bigger thing out of a bunch of small parts. So the bundles of sticks, and then the bundles of sticks relate to the flutes on the classical column, and it gives this idea of sort of continuity, and that architecture has this place in our memory and our imagination and nostalgia, and it allows for this conversation between the past and the present, and you get modernism, which is sort of the rejection of any kind of historicist's notion, but then you get postmodernism, and even the best modernists were very accommodating in their very sort of subversive little ways of classicism. So again, as somebody that was trained in this tradition, I'm constantly trying to sort of understand what my primitive hut is and how it relates to what I'm doing presently, and then how like a column, like a Greek column, how it meets the ground and how it addresses the sky and what happens in between. And so there's a constant dialogue, at least in my own head, about these kinds of things, and within with my staff, with the other designers that work here.
Yeah, so I hadn't realized that like the flutes, or potentially the flutes on columns, were potentially related, harkening back to other things, right? So it sort of suggests that everything builds on these primitive ideas and comes forward. And so what I'm hearing you saying is you have your, primitives, maybe some of them I'm seeing, things that you know well and that people see as part of the like vocabulary. These are the words that you bring up.
Yep.
When you're talking, when somebody says it's a lucky climber, you have to draw a box around it to some extent so that it means something.
Yep.
So that you're not just reinventing the universe every time. And then within those bounds, you get to test the limits or change where those boundaries are to some extent. But at least you have a toolbox that you go to. Is that like a fair way of?
Yeah, I mean, in some sense, it's like constant embellishments of the of the sort of basic form, which would be kind of like a single column with platforms coming off of it, and then cable netting all around it, and it's not, or well, it could be anything, but the what I'm always trying to get to, in a way, is this situation where kids can go in there, and it's very strange. The spaces are unlike any of the spaces they would see normally, and they can explore in there without having this sort of referential aspect to it. So and in that way, they can be treated to a very sort of exotic, immersive experience that allows them to then have feel special, right? Because great architecture makes people feel special. It makes them feel like they've been talked to in a way that is respectful and honest, and has sort of timeless qualities to it. So always, I'm always trying to sort of seep some of this sophistication into the projects, and it's not, I'm not always successful. Sometimes my own sense of what's sophisticated is wrong, and sometimes my clients get in the way, and but I think the recipe is generally very good, and it's mostly because what we do here is so well executed. We because we're a design build company, everything we design and build has to go through this sort of obsessive quality control aspect to it. And I'm very fortunate to work with some super talented people that are very passionate about how the minutia of how things go together, be it the you know, the welding or the cabling or the painting or whatever it is. It's the execution of things ultimately is what makes people feel that this is something that's super value, has intrinsic value beyond its you know, its sort of little collection of materials. So, you know, in the same way that a pizza is like this, you know, magical combination of dough and heat and tomato sauce and cheese and whatever other toppings, we try to sort of do the same thing. So, you know, in order to make a very high quality pizza, you've got to have all of those things, but you have to assemble them in, you know, in the proper way and tend to it, you know, put them in the oven for just the right amount of time. You want the bubbles to be just a little bit disgusting. You want the orange grease to slide off the top. And so we try to do a similar thing. And I'm super fortunate to have people working for me or with me that are very dedicated to this and don't accept sort of schlock as a solution to things.
And I've got to imagine that you couldn't explore or have freedom in implementing different designs if you didn't have the fabrication and the designers in close physical proximity, right? Because it's you've got this dynamic where things work and then you get to see them, and that because you design everything digitally and then you have to implement it, right? So I've got to.
Well, the weirdest thing about that is the scale. Really, it's you know, by the time things start getting made, they've all been engineered and you know, vetted. So there's very little actual risk involved. I think it's at least from my perspective. That said, there are a couple of projects I've done, one in particular where I lied to everybody because I was so into this idea. But I knew that if the client knew that my engineer thought it was crazy and the engineer knew that the client thought it was crazy, that it would never get off the ground. So there are times when I take risks because I feel like they're necessary to, again, sort of, move the ball, in a certain sense.
Did that work?
It did work, actually.
Yeah, good.
It wasn't without its nerve-wracking aspects. And as a matter of fact, one morning, I just saw fit to just get in my car before the sun came up and drive down to this site and knock on the door and go and I just had to see one little thing because I was so nervous about it. But the people want to see people take risks. It's important. That's why figure skating is this funny thing, right? Where it was probably the first person who figured out that they could do twirls and whatever was an artist. No doubt about it. It was genuine self-expression going on there, and they had decided to push the boundaries and take this incredible leap towards ice and expressionism and these super modern phenomenons. And but then you look at it the way it is now, and in the Olympics or in professional skating, and it's kind of has this comical aspect. It's like here comes the triple Lutz, and everyone knows what's going to happen, and the question is whether this skater is going to be able to pull it off. And that's where the artistry comes from. It's like all about competence and the risk and of being the first person to have done this. Anyway, what I'm trying to describe is that the threshold for sort of new levels of expression keeps getting farther and farther away from the original person who said, I'm just going to go skate like a wild thing on ice. And now it's like, I'm going to do the most amazing, beautiful thing that anyone has ever seen on ice. So I'm always trying to sort of understand or get to some place where I can say, okay, now it's gonna be the most incredible, outrageous thing that any Luckey climber has ever been. So I'm like the one man or one company. We have our own market. I don't know that we do have competition. Actually, a lot of people have started making much more expressive playground equipment, and I don't know how responsible for that I am or this company is, but it seems plausible that they do look at what we do. But to me, it's the risks. People need to sense that somebody's taken some crazy risks, and nobody wants to see anyone play it safe because that's boring. You can only hear so many covers of Margaritaville before everyone just walks out of the room.
And so when you say risk, it's really a risk at the kind of like the design stage. So, there's some point, when do you know that risk has paid off, right? Like
Hopefully it's risks almost throughout. Like in the paradigm, there's a risky design, there's a risky idea.
Yeah.
And then there's a risky design, and then there's a risky execution. So it's just like the figure skater saying, I'm going to do this totally outlandish thing. They practice it, then they execute it in front of millions. And that's the ideal. And people want to see that. People have an appetite for it, and they have an appetite also for things that are handmade and have, all this sort of record of people making funny little decisions all over the place. It makes it fascinating for people. That's why paintings are so valued in our societies, because you see the hand all over. That's what it is. You're watching human expression, and that's what makes it interesting. Is humans are fundamentally. I mean, we look out into space, and we figured out cars and the internet, blah blah blah. But it's all this facility for humans interacting with other humans. Humans are really just interested in other humans.
I like that concept of seeing the many little decisions. It's almost like an old house, and you can appreciate that like hand-hewn beam because you're thinking of the person who's there chopping away, and they work around the knot, or there's a constant interaction because each moment, each thing that you're doing, you're presented with a new little micro decision. And so if you can see that, it's not, particle board that's just pumped out of a machine. There is a mind that you can imagine your own mind in, right? So it takes you into the skin of that designer, that lumberjack, that, person building something around you, which you get divorced from when it's too automated. And we're about to enter the automated, we're on the precipice of everything being automated. So, and computer generated. So maybe that's maybe the last thing valuable to people will be this concept that's difficult for to reproduce authentically without people.
Yeah. I mean, it's a mass production kind of promises that everyone is going to get, a great whatever it is, totally competent. But like nobody's passionate about their telephone, even their cell phones. They break it, they lose it, they get another one. It's not like your old leather wallet or your old leather shoe that has this kind of historical aspect to it, that stain is there from when I stepped in the puddle or whatever.
Yeah, and improvisation.
Right.
I remember I took a trip overseas, and I was thinking about what souvenir I wanted, and we went to a bar, and this guy came out with like a carriage bolt with like some other random metal welded on it, and then like a stick that had clearly been like hand chiseled down, and he cracked open the beer, and I was like, that is the coolest beer opener. And it was in Myanmar. And I was like, I walked around, I went to all these places, and I went back to the bar, and I said, what would it take for me to buy that bottle opener that he used? And he has, broken it. He's like, I like it, but I was able to, like, I offered some ridiculous amount, and I paid like $20 for this thing, and but it was awesome, and it's the best, memory, because you see it was generated from the people, and they're like the resources that they had at hand. They didn't have a lot of mass produced things, and they created it. And for them, it seemed very like I heard them laughing when I bought it from them.
Yeah.
In the back room. But like for them, it wasn't something special, but you could see the creativity and the resources and the artist at work, in that, the resourcefulness.
It makes it very endearing.
Yeah. And so, all right. So I guess when you're talking about risk, once this climber is up, you guys have to like stress test it or something, right? Like you just like get a bunch of weights, or you pull, like, how do you, or I guess it's just so engineered at that point that there's no structural risk in these things, right? I've seen them. They're pretty meaty.
No, sometimes they shake, and we have to, our engineers
shore them up. Yeah.
Just like everybody else. And I'm not perfect in that. I often make kind of willful decisions, and then won't go back on them, because I feel like there's some sort of aesthetic compromise that goes along with it, and I can become very petty in some of those circumstances.
Very artistic of you.
Well, anyway, well, I think that, proportion and things like that really matter. Again, it's the evidence of the hand. It's like, if I'm not enabled or allowed the opportunity to make some bad decisions, where, that's something that spans too far and bounces as a consequence, it's kind of my little vanity, I suppose, in some ways. It's like,
but some of those things end up being the characteristics you love.
Right. Because of this, I don't prize competence above all else. I sort of feel like competence is maybe for somebody else in some ways. And it's part of my experiment in the world as an artist is to go with my impulses and allow them to sort of dominate in some regard. And I think that if my artistic impulses didn't dominate, for these key, junctures during the design process, I would design boring things.
Yeah.
And I know this because when I was in architecture school, at a certain point, I decided that I was, because my father was an artist, I decided that I was going to be different than my daddy, and I was going to be competent. And I was going to be an architect's architect. And that experiment didn't go very well for me. I'm sort of incapable of doing a lot of the things that a really competent architect can do. But it also sort of gave me a value system in a way, because I don't think that one has to be able to rationalize all the little decisions one makes about everything. I don't think that's necessary. I'm not an architect who has to sort of evaluate things in terms of their costs and benefits to these big clients and whatever. So, I take my own risks. We generally, the way that the projects are budgeted, I have wide latitude about a whole number of things. And, usually clients really only care about, is it fabulous, and art and the colors. Color is like one of these things that's so accessible to so many people. You see, the color white means something, color black means something, and it gives people, it's like very similar to what I was talking about at first about nostalgia and and recollection. So clients take that as like that's where they can really enter and have their way with me. And I by and large let them. It's
What do you
it's
mean
sort of,
nostalgia and recollection? Like they're saying like it should be like this? I didn't quite understand what you're getting at there.
well, so it's pretty common for me to get to some point in a design where I'm like, okay, so this would really look great as a black and white thing. And wouldn't that be funny? And I'm kind of impish about it because I'm always trying to like, well, specifically with black and white, I just think it would be hilarious to make a black and white piece of playground equipment. Nobody, you never see it. It's so strong and expressionistic and would be sort of self validating in a way. But clients really want, most of my clients are like children's museums or malls, and they don't want some sort of weird, aggressive thing. They want it to be, tarted up and made to be sort of soft and kid friendly. So it's kind of this funny conversation that I have through pictures with clients. And it happened a couple of years ago. We got this job in Costa Rica, and they sent me all these pictures of tree frogs and stuff. And all I could think was, oh, evil tree frogs, poisonous tree frogs, and sort of fucked up tree frogs. And so I did some research into frogs. I mean, these frogs that are so toxic that they even look toxic. They're like this crazy colored yellow. Everyone can see them. Nobody's going to eat them. It's just like, again, it goes back to the sort of like power of color code. Anyway, I thought, God, how cool would it be to make an evil climber? So I designed this thing. It had these crazy points on the top and had this really jaunty kind of aggressive posture. And I made it kind of black and red and even flat black, I think it was. I mean, it was just really kind of amazing looking, at least to my mind. I just thought, wow, like people are going to see this and be just completely terrified. And I think some kids are scared of my climbers anyway, because they seem too tall or whatever. And I think that that's a key element. I think kids need to feel that there's some risk to if they're going to go get a reward. I mean, it sort of goes with the territory. You can't get something for nothing. And so I thought maybe I could kind of do a play on this. And it was sort of this tower thing. Anyway, they took one look at it and it like instantly turned green. And all the pointy points were softened. And
I guess you've seen 100 playgrounds, more in your imagination. And for those people, they're seeing it for the first time. So I guess your enjoyment of sort of the variation is probably higher. They want the boilerplate. I can understand from their perspective why they would not indulge that artistic expression. Although for the right person, it might be exactly, sometimes nail it,
No, some clients are just like, whatever. And others are, I mean, it's funny too. I have to, we do projects for these people overseas, and I have no idea about who my client is really. I've never spoken to them. And there are all these kind of filters and go-betweens. And it's always really fun to try to figure out what would make them happy, what would make them feel like they were involved in some kind of risk-reward relationship with me, and how it's going to pan out, and how do I describe it in a way that will that won't offend them, but meanwhile I'm still trying to give them something that they want. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's like in not want in a I want ice cream kind of a way. It's more like, I want double chocolate ice cream. Wouldn't that be cool? So you know, that because that's kind of the experiment. It's never really just vanilla ice cream.
And have any of these?
Although I think that we are kind of getting to a point where, I mean, people do. We have a little collection of climber models.
Mhm.
You know, they're pre-designed and they stand up on their own and everything. And more people are just buying straight out of the catalog, if you will, because I think they they recognize that they have an out. They don't have to deal with me so much and my crazy impulses.
Yeah.
You know,
Well, have you had controversies? Like, have you installed something, and maybe that's good, right? That it starts a conversation, and people, like, half the people loved it, and half the people thought it was an abomination. Have you had those? Um,
I
for
don't
instance,
really know,
yeah. Okay.
because I don't. You know, the playground equipment doesn't have like a whole lot of controversial potential. It's like the audience isn't thinking about it that way, and nobody who's purchasing it
Yeah.
is thinking about it that way. And I think that there's a kind of a good faith thing that they're having with me, where they think that they assume that I'm not being subversive, and if I am, I'm going
Yeah.
to be.
Then
I'm
it
going to.
doesn't, make some sort of shape or something. There's no hidden message in it. Yeah.
But I have done some with hidden messages. I can't help it. It's it's part of my responsibility. Um, I don't know. There, and I'll tell you about the one that I did that was kind of controversial, or not controversial, because nobody's ever talked about it really. I've told a few people, but we did this project in Indiana, and it was right around, I think it was in 2014 maybe, or 15, and um, they were uh, they were enacting all these. Vice President Pence was then the governor of Indiana, and he was, you know, they were enacting all of those anti-gay laws, and there was a gay guy that worked for me in my office, and we had a trade show that we were going to in Indiana, and it was all sort of coming together. And then we got this project there. We've done a bunch of projects in Indiana, so there was nothing particularly extraordinary about that, except that there it was. You know, I was like, this is kind of weird. And then it turned out that Mike Pence was like best friends with the mayor of the town that we were putting this thing in, and I just was like, this is kind of weird. Like, the whole context of this thing is just weird. You know, I don't know how to feel about it, and it seems like they should have they should there should be something in there that acknowledges this context. And so I do a lot of projects or messing around with helixes. Often when I design a climber, I start with the steel, because you know, the platforms and what they're ultimately going to end up being is kind of the secondary decision. It's always about you know, how do I make a simple structure that's going to stand up and is kind of interesting in some way. But with my experiments with helixes, and the reason why I design a lot with helixes is because it's the most kind of most complicated, simple bend that you can make on a piece of steel. So it seemed like a good place to start for somebody like me. And you know, and then helixes have this kind of funny quality, right? Like, you can take two basically identical helixes, and you start to sort of pattern them together, and they make one kind of pattern. And if you take two opposite helixes and you put them together, they make a different kind of a pattern. And so there's these symmetries and asymmetries that are pleasurable and sort of interesting to me. And so I decided that I would make two figures. I don't know, two human figures, kind of, out of two helixes that went the same way, and then were chained together. Literally, they had to come in the door together, and they had to get erected together, and they don't, you know, they're inseparable. They showed up, and it was a really interesting process. I don't go on a whole lot of installs anymore, but I decided to go on this. It just worked out this way, that they, you know, the crew needed somebody, and I was like, you know, I should go. This is going to be kind of amusing. And the thing was like a ridiculous pain in the ass to get off the truck, in the door, and erected, because they were welded together. It was this, you know, strange thing. And it got so, you know, we were sort of in over our head at one point, and we had to call in some help. And the help never questioned why I had made these things the way I'd done it. It was so interesting to me. They never said, you know, why didn't you just make it some way that you could take them apart, or, you know, why was it important that they come welded together? But it was all part of my little narrative that I'd had about this gay couple being married in this community center in Indiana at that time. And I never told them that this was my agenda, and it's a lovely little piece of playground equipment in their community center, but it's also meant to be gay. And because I just thought it needs to be there. Like, those people need to understand that there are other gay people that would be married or whatever right there. And so, but I've never told them about that, and I certainly didn't tell them about it while I was designing it or installing it or anything, or even after the fact. I mean, these are people that took a chance on me, and it's you know, I have to respect that, and I don't want to humiliate anybody.
Sure.
But at the same time, I have my own little agendas.
And yeah, so are you happy with having done, you know, having that in there? I mean, it's probably something that only you recognize, or do you think other people see that in it?
I have no idea.
Yeah. You've never heard back of it. So I was thinking about what you were saying earlier with risks and playgrounds and different things. And I've seen these adventure playgrounds. Are you familiar with like that? I'm sure that term is like common, or but just that idea of you're supposed to build in a sense of risk. And in the case of adventure playgrounds, real risk, and that you're actually building your children's capacity to make decisions and have some autonomy and to be adventurous, where too many of our playgrounds, you know, you see them and they're just completely bubble wrapped and, you know, foamed everything so that they're so safe that you're not, the purpose of play is for children to experience things that build skills up to the point where they're capable adults. And in some way, by coddling our children, you know, in lots of different ways, we do them a disservice. And I mean, there's something kind of analogous that I had heard, that the way that we as adults interact with national parks is that, like, you know, you go in, there's all this signage: don't go on the rocks, or slippery, don't play in the water, there's a waterfall there. There's all these signs. And so people get so habitual, you know, they're used to these signs that they expect them everywhere. And so once they get off the trail and they go to these places where there aren't signs, they'll walk off a cliff or do things because they expected the safety police to have put clear signage up. But when you put people in an environment that doesn't have all those signs initially, that they take note and they start calculating the risk and start thinking about what chances they should take, and so are less likely to take dumb chances. I mean, it certainly still happens. And I wonder, you know, where there's an analogy between people and adults, and where playgrounds.
People and adults.
Or, sorry, children, young people, and older adults. Yeah, you're right. I don't know, it's just that thread of so you're
Yeah,
familiar with adventure playgrounds and that dynamic of
absolutely.
risk for the participant?
Yeah, I can't really play in that pond because I'm it's really, really, really important that I make very safe things. The
Yeah.
people that I work for absolutely require it. My insurance company requires it.
Yeah.
Um, Yada yada yada. At the same time, um, I think that there's a huge component to what we do that does have this risk reward thing going on, and um, you know, it's in some sense our climbers are like big safe trees. You can navigate up them and um, see all around, and that's it's a vantage thing. Um, but then the platforms themselves are always very stable. Unlike a tree, the higher in a tree, the higher you go, the riskier situation is, right? If you fall, your chances of dying increase dramatically the higher you go. But that's not the case in a climber at all. So it's kind of a false risk or something like that. At the same time, I think it's really important for there to be some risk and some amount of kind of decision making and problem solving and all of those same things. It's just a different kind of context. And so, or it's kind of scaled back and more choreographed. And maybe it's like a tight pinch point where somebody has to plan their body movements to then, slip through and be able to grab the next thing and do it, economically. But sort of circling back, in a lot of ways, I see the project of childhood as the project of trying to get more rights. And children are constantly, it's really, they're always trying to get to sort of the next level of liberty. And so it's like, do I have to hold hands when we cross the street? Do I get to tie my own shoes? All of these kinds of things are influenced by one's behavior. And I feel like I sense that a climber um, has some very positive aspects to it. For one, unlike a lot of playground equipment, which is highly stigmatized, when you see a fake castle or a fake pirate ship, the kid, when they reach a certain age, they don't go in there because of the stigmas associated with it. To go in there is to buy in to these fantasies, or it means that you have Biden, or you're capable, or you're willing, and all of that to buy into these ridiculous fantasies, and that you yourself are going to run around saying arg or whatever if you're in a pirate ship, or trying to save the damsel in distress or slay the dragon in the fake castle. And but all of that is bullshit. Kids bring so much creativity to the table, or not necessarily creativity, but they bring their agendas to the table. So my kid went through some funny little Star Wars phase when he was little. So everything for that week and a half or whatever was Star Wars. And he could be out in anywhere and it would just be Star Wars. So I don't think it's those kinds of coding are non-essential. They're really just there to sort of make adults feel comfortable about buying this thing because it looks like something. But kids, when they see them and they reach a certain age, acknowledge that to go in there is actually going to undermine their project of gaining more autonomy. So I reasoned that by making things that are sort of fundamentally non-essential, non-referential, that kids can then go and explore, and without these funny stigmas, for a much longer time. And I know that kids, we've done some climbers that are super popular with tweens and even teens because they don't have this coding into them, and they're in fact they're kind of sophisticated aesthetically. So it doesn't have it's not as fraught relationship with the built environment. Kids can go in there and explore without this sort of odd repercussion of, this kid was suspending his disbelief and went right into the dragon's mouth, when everyone knows the dragon is made out of wood, and it's all very silly. But if you remove the dragon image from the big weird thing, and you just say it's a big weird thing, then kind of anyone is invited to come and enjoy it in whatever way they want. And it even allows you adults to stand by and say, and I just imagine they do this because I don't really actually visit all that many climbers, but they appreciate them for aesthetic reasons. And so then it doesn't close anything off. It's much more accessible in that way. So I think that's, to me, the Adventure Pro Playground is an incredibly important movement, but it has really I can't engage in that. I can engage in other forms of risk, but actual physical risk, I think, is beyond this.
Sure.
I just can't do it. It's bad for business.
And that's completely understandable at the scale and size. But it does seem like there's a kinship in, even if it's the artificial risk that it's produced by the height and the constraint and as you talk, the body motion. To me, it harkens, climbing trees. That was part of my youth. That was an important part. And those are real risky trees. And, I remember that, you're testing the branch. You're thinking through, is this a rotten branch? Is this not a rotten branch? There's drama in it. So.
But the other, we did a project a bunch of years ago using glass panels, and the idea was that it would we were trying to make something that was kind of like the brain, and so glass, is transparent when you look at it from some angles. When it's lit, it becomes very opaque. It's reflective. So it's kind of analogous to sort of like intuition and contemplation and these other things. But really what it is this climber in its physical actuality is a thing that one has to, when you step onto it, you have to suspend your disbelief about glass and how strong you think glass ought to be. Other people are playing in it too, but you personally have to cross this threshold. So I think that's kind of interesting. And what's most interesting about that project, and to me personally, is that, it was meant to be this kind of analog of the brain, but in its actuality, it's this like crazy chaos. Kids go in there and they are just wild asses. It's so awesome. There's this
not cerebral.
Not at all. The lights it's got this crazy light show, and lights bouncing all over the place, and it's got this soundtrack, and because of that, your eye doesn't catch up quickly enough to the changes in light, so you're constantly disoriented, and it has this hall of mirrors aspect, and kids play tag in there, and it's just amazing. And then there's a group of autistic kids that go to this, it's the Franklin Institute, and I guess they go there pretty regularly, like once a month or every couple of weeks, and this is where they love to go because it's sensory overload. It's gorgeous and frantic and crazy and outrageous, and it's immersive, and that's a really great experience, I think, for them. The other climber that we did that has kind of very tangible risks is that one that I was mentioning before, where I had to lie to the client and lie to my engineers. And it's this thing that's just cantilevered off of the side of this balcony or corridor, and it's so sort of unlikely. I mean, everyone along the way was like, you should really just attach it to the ceiling. Like, wouldn't that be I mean, the engineers said this, the client said this, my partner was like, come on, like can't we just use a couple of cables or whatever to hold it up? But to me, it's very important that you can't see the special effect, and that it does look precarious, and then it kind of is like it's dependent upon this whole invisible infrastructure to stay up and not destroy the building. And so it's kind of amazing. Like, we went there for the opening and my wife wouldn't even go in it because she was like, what if it falls?
She knows you too well.
I just think it's great. It's so cool. I mean, it's how many other people have that same response to it? It's like exactly what I wanted. And kids line up to get in that thing. They go again and again and again, and they can't get enough of it. I mean, it's wild and weird, and I think that that's what makes it compelling for them. And again, it's about not talking down to them and being like, of course we all know that there's some cables holding the thing up, but if you squint, you can't see them, kind of thing. But if you just say, no, we're going to totally commit and be all in on this, and it's a much bigger success. And it's so strange a thing that it made it into a, that magazine Time Out in New York, so a bunch of years ago, after this thing came out, Time Out published this list of the 10 best playgrounds in Manhattan or in New York City that you can get into for free, that are designed by famous artists. So this thing, the Luckey Climber, made it onto the list, and I'm not famous. It's not in New York City. It's in Jersey City, and you have to pay to get in there.
So if I wanted to find it online, how do I? What would I search? Jersey City Climber?
Liberty Science Center.
I just want to. Oh, is it white?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll just share it so you can get a look at it.
I've seen it.
Well, yeah, but I haven't.
Bobby Olivia with NJ.
Huh. So
it's a good time. I'm a little sweaty from going through it a few times, but it's good. I can't wait to bring friends and family here. It's gonna be fun.
He's a big kid.
Yeah, I don't know what that is. Anyway, that project, was sort of meant to be. Well, it was interesting. The client, I gave them some safer options, and but being kind of like New Yorkers or proto New Yorkers, I knew that they were going to go with this scheme because when we were talking about the specifics of it, they said, "Oh, so you just step over the edge to get into it?" And I was like, "Yeah, you just step right over the edge." They love that. It's risky, even though it's not. It has the appearance of being potentially, catastrophic.
So if you were to build some specifically for adults, how would you change it all? Would you? I mean, he was wandering through it. I right now we're talking about that feeling that kids get where they don't want to go to the pirate ship. I've felt that on playgrounds. I want to go play on the playground sometimes, but I know I'm not supposed to, and I'm too big. And I'm sure there's a lot of folks that feel that. And you go to, I don't know if you're familiar with City Museum in
Absolutely.
so I went, it's an incredible exploratory place. And then there's Meow Wolf out in Santa Fe. Have you been there? It's
No, I
not
haven't been to Meow Wolf.
It's a big installation, but it does give you that feeling. And in the Meow Wolf one, you're in this house, and then you open the refrigerator. It's made up perfectly. You open the refrigerator, and then there's a tunnel in it, and you have to like get on your hands and knees and crawl through a tunnel. So there's this idea of having permission to play as someone who's older, and where that. So if I was to commission you to make the awesome version that I would be socially allowed to play in, what would you change? What would you do?
Well, I think it's mostly just a scale thing. I wouldn't change that much. Really, if I wouldn't change hardly anything. I'd always just play, as a designer, again, I had this experience in architecture school where I was trying to be something that I wasn't, and it was a bit of a failure. And so I'm always just trying to make myself happy. And I think with adults I might get away with a little bit more evil climber and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, I'm not so sure that I would even want to do that. It just doesn't make all that much sense to me. I think that it's much more important for me as a playground. I mean, it's interesting to think about. I mean, I always thought that I would get an adult climber commission from a strip club or something like that.
With a bar in the middle. And yeah.
And I think that they're great hangouts. There was these children's museum conferences that they hold around the country. And whenever there's one at a place that has a Luckey Climber in it, I am always like, well, guess who's buying drinks tonight? Because it's, I just try to turn the climber into a hangout in a bar. And it's super fun. So I think that there's a lot there. And I actually have this fantasy of making a climber/bar where during the day it's a piece of playground equipment, not unlike the City Museum, right? The City Museum is totally set up this way, where during the day, it's kid friendly and everyone's, nobody's drinking and smoking. And then, as the clock strikes, whatever it is, 7 or 8 at night, it shifts over to this much more adult-centric agenda, that has, of course, a lot more to do with, sex and hedonism. It's funny. I got a nibble once from the Sex Museum down in Manhattan. Sort of sad that didn't come to fruition. But I don't know. In that instance, I wanted to. I was going to try to get them to make a climber that had TVs in for the panels, and then the TVs would have lots of erotica all over them, and then the whole situation would be just super stimulating and wild. But that's kind of an outlier. It's not exactly the the situation you're talking about. I think it would be wonderful. In my fantasy, all climbers are inhabited by people of all ages, and I've seen adults. Parents are kind of like, they're sort of sick of their kids or whatever, and they go to playgrounds to the kid has something to do, and they can get back to their best friend on the phone or whatever, and drink their coffee. But grandparents go in climbers because they can't get enough of their grandkids. So I think as a sort of communal thing that kids and adults can do, it's very great, I think. I mean, every time I've gone and worked on a climber, I feel much better. It's like doing yoga for a few weeks
Sure, yeah.
or something. So maybe they have lots of medicinal health benefits for adults, and I could pitch it as a sort of a Zumba class.
Yeah, it's a whole new market. So you said you don't used to travel, and you don't so much anymore, that you would go overseas. Because I was looking at your map, and you've got climbers all over the place. Just not like, it looked like it didn't have South America, maybe.
We have one in Costa Rica.
Okay, yeah. So I see right there. It'd be Central America, wouldn't it? Technically,
Yep.
I don't know.
And we actually have a contract for one in Rio.
Okay, cool.
It's just exiting the design phase now.
And you have two in
Hawaii.
Hawaii. One, it looks like Maui and Oahu.
Correct.
Yeah, and do you find that the reception of these things is universal? So do you take the opportunity to go overseas, like to Iraq or different parts of Asia when you get a chance to do these? Or
yeah, I've been to China a couple times. Been to South Korea, Indonesia. I haven't, I didn't go to Kuwait. Ireland, some of the Russia, and I definitely went to one of the projects in Hawaii.
Who wouldn't?
Who wouldn't, right? I turned that one into a family vacation. It was wonderful. Anyway, yeah, I'm kind of a homebody, I have a wonderful wife and a wonderful child, and traveling, it's exhausting. And I have this real resistance to leaving, my little comfort zone. But that said, once out there, I really do love it. I think it's so wonderful to listen to people talk in strange ways. And, in China, you can kind of just slip off the beaten path, and pretty soon you're in a place where, nobody has seen, or you can imagine that nobody has really seen up close, American person. I've had my photos taken of, I don't know. It's a weird thing. You don't really realize it as an American that people are watching, and if you go to a strange place, they're going to think you're strange.
Yeah, I've been places and had somebody come up with their kid and be like, let me take a picture with you and the kid, like I'm an interesting tourist object.
Right. Exactly.
But you have to get off the beaten path a little bit for that. And if people take like sneaky photos of you because they think you look neat.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's that's a trip for sure. What's interesting as I look at this map is like you really have clusters. So you get like, Los Angeles, you get a bunch. You get Chicago. Looks like you got Indiana, obviously the Northeast where you are located, Houston. And so it seems that, that suggests to me that it's word of mouth, that it's like people that have seen it come back to their place, and then they say they really want to do it. Or what do you suspect that pattern's related to?
It's absolutely the way it happens. The marketing is, it's this, I can't even pretend to understand it. We do a fair amount of marketing, but I don't know how, I have no way of knowing how successful or whatever it is. The thing that I know works is, as you suggested, it's making things that people love, and then other people want some of that. And it's something they they want to bring it back to their people in LA or whatever. Like the reason why we have so many projects in LA is because we did this large project at the Houston Children's Museum, which is where this guy from one of the higher ups at one of these mall companies went to college. So he was, back in Houston, hanging out with his old college buddies. And he brought his kid to the Children's Museum, and he saw the thing, and he found out who made it. And then he hired us to do a job at the Century City Mall in LA. And then from there, we've gotten a bunch of other projects in LA. So it happens most often very organically like that. And then once we were in this high-end mall in LA, on Santa Monica Boulevard, then other mall companies take notice because they all watch each other. And then we got more jobs out of that. We did, and the same thing happens in the Children's Museum world, except they're more, it's almost proprietary, or I've heard people say, oh, well, we're not going to get a Luckey Climber because everyone else has one. So we've kind of rounded the corner there in the Children's Museum world, which I think is pretty funny. But it's mostly word of mouth, mostly. And with the kind of caveat that it's also, the internet plays a huge part in it. Like, I have no idea how we got jobs in Russia, for example. Sure. Like, that's just completely mysterious to me.
Well, they're very photogenic. They're visually interesting. So I've got to imagine that Instagram, all of these social networks that people are posing in front of them, that you're probably thinking about not only the experience of the user, but as you walk in the room, what does this sculpture look like? And so people are going to do a selfie in front of it. And that's, I would think that you're only advantaged by the social media, Instagram culture, photography stuff happening.
But bear in mind, there's no, it doesn't have like, there isn't enough very much real estate dedicated to my name.
Sure.
So they're very obscure in a very basic way. And then kids they're not as obsessed with brand as adults are. And they don't read, and they're the end users, but they're not really the consumers in a way. So, that's kind of been the riddle of marketing for us. And if I could, I would love to be able to figure out a way of communing directly with the end users, because I feel like if I could get them involved, that would be real horsepower.
Mm-hmm.
But the procurement process is the same as it ever was for playground equipment, and it's this group of adults making what they think is a responsible decision. And
like a committee or something, right? Because it's a capital investment, is part of an improvement to a wing.
That's right.
And probably like a donor, and the donor has their own criteria, and then there's the person who's running it who's really scared because they don't want to tick the donor off. Yep. But they want it to be cool, and then there's the artist. So you have I imagine you have a lot of constituents in that buying process.
Often I have no idea who they are and what their agendas are. But again, that's kind of fun in the sense that it's a problem in and of itself. When we did this job in Moscow, they wanted a space theme, and so we made this kind of atom-shaped thing out of these hoops, and then put Hubble spaceship telescope pictures all over it, and
they went into that.
They were into it. They just immediately were like, space, totally spaced out. And that was German. Anyway.
Was the Hubble an international project? I wasn't sure if it was. It must have been. Oh, it was American. Yeah.
But those pictures are out there. You can just use them whenever you want. They're in the public.
Yeah. Open.
Cool. So, there's this, how do you please all of these constituents? I just don't know. And I just try to make myself happy. I know that if I can make myself happy and trick myself into getting really excited about aspects of the thing. A good example is going back to that climber that the tree frog climber that I was trying to make evil.
Yeah.
In my sort of obsession with making something that looked evil, I actually designed something that was kind of elegant and is fine when it's green. And, so I sense that by very genuinely making myself happy, I'm, that kind of translates into other people looking at it and going, well, it gives me joy, and they can't identify why, or maybe they can, I don't know. But that to me that's my secret, if you will, is that I always just try to do things that I like, because I have I have nothing else to lean on.
Yeah.
And that's not to say, it doesn't always happen. I don't, sometimes I delude myself. Sometimes I'm, in a bad mood or whatever, and it comes out. And sometimes these things get built. Sometimes they get built and then built again and again and again and again. And it's just, I have a needle to thread, because, I run a business. I can't just be completely willful about the things that I do. And if some customer, client, or whatever you want to call them, comes to me and says that I want something just like that other thing, I can try to talk them out of it, but I certainly don't want to go so far as to risk the business itself.
Well, at that point, it's validated that other people see something in it. And so maybe it's not what you were looking for, but maybe even that anger or the bad mood transfers to it, and somehow that resonates with other people. So you never, if people respond to it and they're asking for it, that's some, almost irrefutable evidence that people like it.
Yeah.
Which means something.
It does.
Yeah.
Again, it kind of goes back to the prototyping, the obsession over prototyping and all of that. And it's sort of troubling to me when things aren't as great as they could be, and that's acceptable.
Yeah.
And desirable. It's the it's the sort of Big Mac approach to food. And there's a certain cynicism associated with that. And I'm not saying that I'm, there in any way. It's just, I think a lot of people come to me and they don't really they want a Luckey Climber. They don't really want to deal with me. And I think that's perfectly valid also.
Yeah.
It was a kind of a weird realization to make, that because I can be difficult. I'm not like I play games with my clients when I don't understand what I'm doing, and I sandbag, and
Well, some people want a product, and some people want an artistic experience. They want something that's commissioned and thought through. They want to see. We were talking about the hand of the artist.
Yeah.
And I imagine that that hand of the artist needs the context of the place and needs that interaction to come up with something truly unique to that environment. Where if you have a boilerplate and you drop it in there, you're going to keep your committee happy because you've de-risked it. You haven't made potential for something unique, but you also lose that uniqueness. The novelty is reduced. So I think you do right by doing both. The consumer gets, the consumer wants.
Right.
Yeah. So I have I could talk all day, but I know you also are running a business. I'll give you the chance to break away, or I've got a couple other questions if you want to chat. It's up to you.
I'm not as busy as I once was.
You guys are slower, I imagine, in this environment, the COVID.
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot of design work going on, honestly. It's we had some projects that were in the works, like one in Rio and a couple sprinkled around the country, but it's you know, we were going great guns. I had, you know, my two designers were working as much as they could, and the bookkeeper was very busy balancing the books, and my salesman was doing all kinds of this, that, and the others, and it's all pretty much ground to a halt. It's kind of weird, but.
And are you optimistic that those are institutional pauses because of just the severity, and that we'll start to see it, or do you feel like there's a, how are you looking at it?
Well, I think that it's going to necessitate a real pivot for us. I think we get. I don't really know how a lot of the projects that we do are funded, but I suspect that in America anyway, a lot of the money comes from the states, and and I think some of it's federal grant money, and some of it's corporate grant money, and some of it's just private donations. But when there's a pandemic going on, people don't go to playgrounds. Their appetite for playgrounds just goes through the floor.
Yeah.
And it was like the first thing that they shut, absolutely non-essential. And it'll probably be the last thing that gets turned back on, because what the hell? Who cares? But interestingly enough, we've gotten a lot, and by a lot, I don't mean it's sort of an odd proportion of nibbles from Asia, Singapore, Taiwan, and Japan, and a little bit in China specifically. And that it seems to me that they want, they're much more able to kind of come out and think about these things. And I don't know why they're calling me exactly, because they hadn't so much before. Maybe it's just, I don't know what it is, but that's going to be kind of interesting. And it requires that we sort of change the business in some pretty basic ways. The way that we do things these days, or in the past, was to make this kind of kit of parts. You get the steel armature, and you've got the panels, and then you have the the pallets of cable and all of that hardware and stuff. And we would put all of that in a box and send it away. And then my guys would show up and meet the container or whatever, the truck, and assemble the whole thing. And it might take weeks of painstaking labor. But I think that in this era, we're going to have to do a lot more of the labor here. And it's kind of interesting. We did this job at the end of last year in Abu Dhabi, and they had some really stringent logistical constraints, and we could only be on site for a week. And furthermore, it was out in the crazy hot 120-degree sun and stuff like that. So I had a real incentive to try to figure out a way to mitigate some of that. And so we figured out a way to nearly completely pre-cable the whole thing, and then take it apart and put it in a container and ship it over there. And then the guys just put it up in the matter of days. And so I see that as being a very, very much a potential business model going forward. And it'd be great to get to the place where we're building things here, boxing them up in a very specific way, and shipping them over to places far and wide, and having somebody else put them together.
Yeah.
Because that's where we're at. It's going to be essential. But I also think that there's some real opportunities there because, you know, it really it cuts down on my liability with the traveling and everything, and the whole erection thing is somewhat, you know, it has little dangers hidden all throughout it, and you know, amongst those dangers is just, you know, is the notion that like if you put 3 dudes in a canoe, are they all going to agree to paddle to the same place? You know, it's like the sort of basics of cooperation that are needed to just make anything happen are, you know, it's way beyond my control from here in Connecticut. So I think it has some real benefits. You know, that is like I can manage quality here much easier than I can manage it in the field. And so my hope is that we do a lot of these kinds of projects, because I think that they're, you know, again, going back to this notion of the prototype, I feel like this is where it needs to go. Like this is the prototype delivery, and it's going to change the kinds of things that we design and the way that we design them, and the product. But I think that it's going to be liberating in some other ways. And so I'm actually very excited about it as a potential. And and it also makes me feel like it is possible to have to replicate what we're doing here and do it in other places, and at much greater volume. You know, as an artist, I'm mostly interested in kind of propagating art, or my, you know, Wacky Climbers. And so the potential to scale it up and do a lot more climbers, to me, is very, very compelling.
I could see like 2, you know, product lines. You know, you've got your kit ones that are maybe more vetted, and what you see is what you get, and you box them up and you ship them over. And then you have your you know, custom design level, which is the tier up. And each of those is unique, and each of those is, you know, different, and there's more interaction. Yeah, but then you could get just more of the idea out there, actually make the customized ones more notable by having many of these more standardized ones. And so that when you now have the vocabulary for seeing what you're familiar with, what these climbers are, and now you see one that's different, you're like, whoa, this is, you know, who you understand that it's a variation.
Yeah. It remains to be seen whether one business model eats the other one, or whatever. But I don't even think here in America, like we have a crew out in Iowa right now, and you know, it's I'm nervous because they've got some sort of meat processing plant nearby, and you know, what if there's a big spike in cases, and you know, one of my guys gets sick because he, you know, went to the wrong convenience store or whatever. And furthermore, does some town in Iowa really want a bunch of guys from Connecticut coming there? Like, you know, that's how things get spread. So I think that there's a real practical element to this that's going to be good, even domestically. And then the other thing that I'm super excited about as an idea, and I don't know that this is going to, it's sort of hard to realize, in the sense that it's going to take a lot of capital. But you know, here at our factory, or whatever you want to call it, shop, studio on East Street, we have this vacant bank building from the 50s, and my ambition is to turn it into the Luckey Museum, and have it have a big outrageous climber in there, and really not much else. And then eventually we'll add food service, and that'll be the prototype for this sort of upscale Chuck E. Cheese concept. Where,
you have to add upscale to Chuck E. Cheese.
yeah, Rocky Cheese. Anyway, the Lucky Cheese. Anyway, that would take some, again, a lot of money, but I think if we can get that off the ground and have a kind of proof of concept here, it seems imaginable that we could replicate it elsewhere. And there's a lot of talk about sort of the death of the mall and the death of the cruise ship, and those are two. The mall, we've gotten a lot of business from malls, and if that all just goes away, my little business is going to really suffer. And so I'm trying to think of ways that I can kind of create my own market and create my own opportunities, because I think that's kind of that's what the situation requires. I think that it's if I'm forever just waiting by the phone, it'll never, in this environment, it's not really going to play out very well for me. And so I think some risks are in the offing. But I think if we can pull that off, I think it would have a dramatic effect on this business. I think that, going back to what we were talking about Instagram and the sort of power of images and the photogenic qualities of the climbers, if the branding was much more thorough, and people left there with Lucky t-shirts and Lucky hats and Lucky Frisbees and Lucky, yeah, thank you very much, and and ate Lucky food and Lucky cheese and whatever, then I think the branding thing would really take off, and I think we could have a much more it would be much more sustainable as a business. It would have much I think it would sort of be a more linear up trajectory, as opposed to our kind of typical sort of sawtooth routine.
Yeah, I can see it also having like evening events for
evening events.
Yeah, evening events would be great. Yeah. I want to go and I want to play.
Yeah, totally.
Cool. And so it sounds like that project's inching along, and you're building your prototype, and you've like been constructing it, right? Is that?
Well, no, we haven't actually. We're in the process of getting the permits.
Okay.
Stuff like that.
And it would be like ticketed, like you would get a ticket or rent the thing for like a birthday or something?
I don't really know. I'd imagine that it's going to have a lot of different ways that it's going to work or not work. I think absent food, it's kind of hard to make it really work and really sing.
Yeah.
But my hope is, that it will be, people will pay to get in there. And it's hard to imagine it being really lucrative, but in a way, I kind of want it to be a little bit. Well, I think absent the food, it's just not. We've done the math. It just isn't a thing. But I think once if we get food involved, then it can become something for everybody. Where adults feel like they've got a real place there. There's a nice, comfortable seating and great Wi-Fi and all that kind of, and great drinks. I don't know, maybe even beer and wine. Then I think it'll do very well, and I think it's would be very simple to replicate. And I think that given the sort of weird situation that's going on with retail in America and in the world, because of the pandemic and Amazon, and there's going to be a lot of vacancy and a lot of opportunity for this to sort of take seed. And
the mall might be dead, but there's still a lot of tourist towns and ski areas, and like Lake Tahoe downtown. There's places.
Well, there's still going to be rainy days, and kids are they're going to have to go someplace, and their parents are going to take them, and they're going to spend a little bit of money, and
I can imagine it being then embedded in your location right now. It's a little tougher as far as what surrounding spillover businesses, but I could see something like that being attracted by a set of businesses actively going and saying, I want a little Luckey Climber shop station in this vacant store, because people are going to come down with their kids and they are going to spend money in the surrounding areas. So it might not be in the form of a mall, but there should still be clusters of retail at some level. And those clusters just might need to work harder. And that's, that becomes an attractive thing.
Yeah. I mean, there are malls that do really well and there are malls that do terribly. And the ones that I've seen that are doing really well are the ones that have Apple stores in them.
Sure.
It's really bizarre.
Because that's the one. I mean, that could be a chicken and the egg. Apple's selecting the malls that are doing well, or there's a question there. So one other question I had for you is, so when you do any Googling about you and Luckey, this documentary pops up, and there's a younger version of you, and the story of your father, and there's tragedy and there's drama. There's a lot to unpack there.
Really quickly go to the bathroom.
Oh yeah, go ahead. I'll do the same.
Cool. Hello again.
Hey, tea drinking and hour-long conversations they get tough.
Yeah.
There you go. That's exactly. So I guess that the documentary, so there's this younger version of you, and we don't need to get into the full story or anything, but I kind of wonder, was it a good experience having a documentary get into your personal life and your family? Do you look at it now as an old picture, like, oh, that's me as a young man and I'm so different? What's your reflective feeling having done that years ago?
Well, it's well, I miss my dad. It's like every time I've watched it again, and I haven't watched it in years, but I just end up thinking what a giant he is, and how crazy cool he was. I mean, he took that incident and situation and kind of turned it on its head. I mean, in the last years of his life, he would say things like, falling on my head was the best thing that ever happened to me, and stuff like that. And, it's just, as an example of a person, he was really, really, truly remarkable. He had this whole ethos about not complaining. He knew that if people visited him and he was just miserable with them and all the time, and told them what a shitty predicament he was in, they wouldn't come back. They would be scared. And so he just was always trying to and he was very disciplined about it. Just stay on the sunny side and stay interested in other people. And he had this amazing facility to make people think that they were the center of his life when he was around them. And I think it was real. So that's what I see. Things like it's sort of like having a book written about you in a way. And, there are two camps about that movie too. There's the camp that think that I'm the hero, and then there's the camp that thinks that I'm the villain. And so, it's kind of one part, I'm very proud of what we did, but I'm also kind of embarrassed by certain instances. And I look back at the person that I was then, and I see this is the same person that I am now. And I'm completely capable of being just as big a jerk as I am in the movie. So, as a sort of point of self-reflection, it was really interesting to go, and travel around with the movie to some extent and do Q&As and stuff like that, and get the tomato in the face, because I thought it was interesting. It was a very I think it has kind of a powerful message, and it was cool. People were into it, and it was fun to have a film crew around. It was really fun. Every once in a while I'd say something and I go like, God, that's totally going to make it into the movie. And then it would make it into the movie. It was like magic. And they were, as somebody that was really inexperienced with a lot of things that I was doing at the time, they were tactically very, very beneficial. They, because everyone wanted to look good on the camera. So in order to do that, everyone had to cooperate. And,
so you need a fake film crew whenever you're doing a hard project. Yeah,
that's right. So yeah, tactically they were great. They really kind of nerfed out the situation in Boston for sure, and made everyone kind of fascinated in the whole thing, to the point where they were, really inclined to cooperate.
Well, it elevates the importance, right? Because it's saying like somebody else, this whole crew has made a decision that this is an important enough thing to document it officially,
right,
and create a movie. It creates a level of seriousness and importance. And so you traveled. So how did it happen? How did you end up did you just know somebody and they're like, this is interesting? Yeah. Or
so the woman that made it was somebody that I actually went to boarding school with, and she was married to the daughter of a friend of my father's. So my father had been to their wedding, and I knew Laura Longsworth. And after my father's accident, my father, again, he had this ability to just make contact with people. And I think Laura called him just to say, just to touch base with him. And my father was like, when are you going to make a documentary film about me? I mean, it was like totally his idea.
So yeah, you'd think that there might be some shame, or people would be less wanting to be put out into the open, but he took it the other way, and maybe it's like the sunny side thing.
Yeah,
that being paralyzed, once you have gotten over that fact, that is who you are, and so putting it out there, and that had to have been his own journey, a difficult journey. Yep. And then everybody has to, you go along with it, where I think people are scared. People are scared of doing the wrong thing, right?
Yeah.
And so it creates a fascination, and it creates a lack of knowing how to interact with people.
Yeah.
And things like that documentary help people to understand and see the family dynamic, right? And the business dynamic, and so on. And I'm sure it's come into your mind. So you're now in his shoes running the business, right? I mean, I'm sure it's different and it's grown. And how do you think it's different to run a business that you are taking over the reins for somebody else, rather than something that was completely generated new? Do you feel a responsibility to that vision? Like, does it make it more of a burden to carry, or does it make it freer because you have something that is established? Or I'm not going to put words in your mouth. Tell me how you see that interaction.
Well, it's complicated. Do you remember the Yankee Doodle? The restaurant?
The song?
No. The restaurant. The burger joint.
Oh, yeah. It was on York Street, right? Or something?
Broadway.
It was the college noodle place?
No,
I don't know.
I don't know. To Tycho, and they made these cheeseburgers and a pig in a blanket and fried donuts and stuff like. They had like 8 menu items, and they had burger eating contests and stuff like that. And anyway, there was these funny pictures on the wall, and there was the guy that started the Yankee Doodle, and his picture, they had the picture on the wall of him standing in front of the Yankee Doodle, and he looked like this. He was just so excited to be starting. He'd started his own burger joint, and this was going to be just like he imagined it. It was perfect. Everything was just amazing and so cool. And then it had his son, and his son was kind of like this. And then the son's son, the grandson, was like this. And I think that I'm kind of on schedule in some ways. Like I don't inherently, I would have intimate knowledge of the struggles that it took to create this company, back at its inception. And I know how hard it was, and how, and my father had a ridiculously high like closure rate from a sales perspective. Like if somebody called a children's museum or whatever, chances are they were going to end up getting the Luckey Climber, because he had to. If it's like a whaling village, they see the whale, they have to go kill the whale, because they need the blubber. And so there was a real necessity. And that kind of happened again when he and I got back together, or when I started in on the company, because his situation was so precarious that we had to make a lot of money for him to just survive. And it was just my I just needed to keep him out of a nursing home and happy, and we pulled that off, and it was a big deal. And so actually he made more money working with me than he ever did all by himself. So I don't know what that says, but we made better things. Some people are really good at inventing things and coming up with new ideas, and other people are good at perfecting them. And I fall into the latter group. I am better at, it turns out, problem solving and sort of burrowing into a problem and rooting it out. And so, my addition to the company changed the way that we make things pretty fundamentally. He used to make models, and let's see, I'm trying, like this model boat right here.
Sure.
And he would just make things like that all the time. But his climber design process was that he would make a little doodle on I'm looking around here for a doodle that I've made. And here's a page of doodle. Probably wouldn't look unlike that. Can you see that?
Yeah.
And then he'd make a model, a physical model, and then he would mail the model to the client. The client would either love it or hate it. They'd mail it back if they loved it, and he'd take it apart and make it. So there's a really kind of archaic 19th century way of going about things. What I brought to the table was that everything got designed in the computer, and then that job in Boston was too big to fit in the shop that I had, and too complicated to sort of reasonably mock up in the way that we'd mocked up things in the past. So we had to figure out some other way. And so I found this little tool that helped translate from the complicated geometries that go on inside of a climber to the real world. And that really expanded the aesthetic possibilities and the geometric possibilities and the scale possibilities, just by making things that were more precise. But also, the computer, the process that there's this phase of things when things are very fluid and you don't really know what you're doing. and things can change and it doesn't have any consequence. But then you sort of, from here, I would get annoyed. I get annoyed with this kind of thing because it has no scale. It has no, there's no reality to it. It's beyond the piece of paper. So then you have to start to sort of try to make it real. And, my father would just make it real once in this physical model, and then he'd ship it off. And again, they would either love it or hate it. But the computer, in computer designing, computer modeling, allows you to iterate and iterate and iterate and iterate. And you can throw things away and it has no consequence. You can adopt things and it has no, material consequence. And you can just kind of maintain this fluidity for a much longer period of time and come up with better things. And so that's what my little contribution brought to the table, was basically taking this germ of an idea about columns, platforms, and cable, and modernize it and make it into something that had, a design process. In a design process doesn't need to be, his process was very linear, and that was its shortcoming. It didn't have these, loops and deltas and tributaries and whatever. It was like win or lose, win or lose, win or lose. So he would do these schemes, and they would be, you'd do one scheme and it would look like this, and then he'd do another scheme and it would look like this, and then he would do and I don't know it. And then once the thing was going to get made, it was super inefficient and kind of, again, sort of 19th century. So by modernizing things, it really loosened up the aesthetics a lot. And so there's a certain amount of, I have a lot of pride in the fact that we actually do things very similar to the way that we did them when I first started with my father. Like, in other words, a lot of the problems that I solved, we actually haven't found better solutions to, which is kind of cool. And a lot of the things that I kind of predicted would happen as a result of this, and kind of, my father was, he didn't, his career didn't really take off until he was in his 40s, which is, he's a real late bloomer. So I had a good 10-year head start on him by getting involved in my 30s. And so I had a lot of, sort of youthful energy that helped me execute things at a higher level than he was really interested in doing it. I mean, he would just hire these people, they would go to these sites and they would do things. But when the job ended, they might go back to their previous lives as house painters or whatever, and they may never do another climber again. But I think that, the continuity of the employees and treating people, really well, and having a sort of a decent business was as essential to the art as anything, because having that kind of, a sort of stable of competence and allows you to do a lot more great things. And so I was that person for a few years. I was the backstop, and then as time has gone on, we've sort of accreted more people, and now it's really a very different company. My brother-in-law is my partner, and it's there's just we're really good at making these things now, and we're thinking about different ways that we can improve it, and these different delivery methods, the prefabrication and all of that. So I don't know that I'll ever have the same kind of prideful smile that the guy that started the Yankee Doodle had when he was standing out in front of his place and they were, taking his photograph. But I've covered, I've crossed a few rivers all by myself, and I think that's it's a valid thing. On the other hand, like the idea of having to go and reinvent myself again, is really troubling to me. So I want to make this work.
Yeah, I think in my own experience, I think it's interesting. There's this journey in that, my dad was a big inventor and building things and a maker. And I was a bit more of a computer nerd and wasn't as so interested in physically building things. And through the period of getting older and just all the things that happen in life, here I end up running a makerspace and learning about all these physical things and being excited and interesting. And now when we talk, we have a lot more, I'll call him for troubleshooting and other sorts of things. And so there's, you wonder about it's the power of, genetics, the power of the environment that you're in a very young age and you're getting imprinted, and also that stage of life. So, you talked about the kids being progressively less happy with the situation, and you wonder to what degree it's just a matter of them growing into it. And that we sort of take you begrudgingly. It's like when you're a kid and they, girls have cooties or, whatever. And then they're like, oh, that will change. And you're like, no, it won't. And then one day it changes.
That's right.
So we sort of, we inherit these stages of our elders, kicking and screaming, but we end up finding ourselves, even little things you find reflecting your parents, I think.
Yeah.
And it's that story to some degree. And so I think like my last sort of question I had is, I know that you have a really cool house.
3 minutes.
3 minutes.
Yeah. Cool. We can cut this off and go back, but I do have to call. I have to call.
Yeah. No. I think we're at a good spot. I mean, I think we're as far as I imagined. So just the house that you live in, just tell me like a couple of things. So you should be seeing this. You've got like skateboard ramp, crazy stuff. This is your house, right?
Yeah. What do you want to know?
Designed by your dad or by you or both?
No, I did it. The short story is I bought a condemned house, and it had no windows, no doors, no plumbing, no electricity, and it was had a family of raccoons living in it, and it was just a total mess. And I made it kind of habitable. My then wife and I moved in there, and we did that for a while, and then we did the documentary, and then I had some free time, and so I put the third floor on it, and this was sort of my piece of architecture. And the only thing, when you don't have a client and you're an architect, and you're sort of weird like me or something, you do something like this. I just thought, it. I don't know. It's a very willful collection of decisions, and
there's a lot. I mean, I like places that you think. So, I mean, there's a lot of hand of the creator in here, right? So it's like you've got a lot of use of plywood at funny angles. You've even got like this, it's almost like dancing trees. There's lots of little scribbles and quirky, the staircase. We could probably have a conversation about each one of these elements and still have more to talk about. But just, and this has almost got rustic feel. You've got a lot of different things going on. And then this outside, what style type is this? I don't even know. Luckey?
Well, I see it as it's kind of California style. I was really influenced by all the LA style architecture, and so that's how I see it, really. And I was really into making something that was weird, just for the sake of it. And this was done, and I was into it because from a technical perspective, I loved the idea, and so I modeled every single 2x4 and stick in this whole thing, and then we put it together very precisely, and it went together very easily. It was this kind of trick that I learned in architecture school, and that I do here at the Luckey Climbers. I just that's kind of my thing. So just with a little bit of organization and some imagination, you can kind of do whatever the hell you want. And a lot of just so many things in the built environment are just not that way. And it's people are obsessed with the bottom line and stuff. And it was, I don't know, this was a fun kind of sort of stamp on my own autonomy, I guess, in some ways. Having in architecture school, every single thing you ever presented to anybody had to be vetted by people, and it had to have a rationale, and so I just loved the idea that I could just make something weird just for the hell of it.
Yeah.
And sort of live and die by my post rationalizations.
and learn every time you stub your toe on this weird outcropping, you can.
That's right.
Pros and cons. Well, Spencer, I mean, I think we're at a great spot to stop. We've got a lot of content here.
Cool.
And, yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me for a long form conversation.
Hello? Hey, is this Jacques? All right, hold on one second, Jacques. Bye, JR.
Bye. I'll see you later.
Great.